Hello and welcome all of you to Prairie Lakes Church. My name is Jesse, and I wish that I could start this part of our service by talking about something other than the stinking weather. But unfortunately, it's not one of those weekends. So last weekend we had a bunch of snow. We know a lot of you, almost 800 of you, joined us online last weekend. It's looking like this weekend may shape up to be one of those as well. So welcome to you. If you're joining us at one of our campuses, welcome to you if you're in the comfort and safety of your own home. Hey, this weekend we're going to conclude a series that we've been in now for 3 weeks, and it's called What Happy Couples Know. And we've just been looking at a couple of things, 2 or 3 things that happy couples, people who just seem to be doing it right in marriage, seem to know. And so if you haven't heard by now at this point, the topic this weekend is going to be more mature, all right? We're going to talk about sex this weekend. And so if you've got a little one next to you somewhere that you think might be okay and now you're having second thoughts about that, now is a great time for you to stand up and make your way into our children's ministry environment. They're ready for you even at this point, all right? And so if you're doing that right now, no shame, but also right now, ushers at all of our campuses, would you guys come forward and with pens. If you want to write some stuff down this weekend as we go, just take some notes, just raise your hand, they're going to find you. The other thing you're going to need is a Bible. We're going to be in a couple of different places in the Bible, in fact, all over the place a little bit this weekend, so we'll have it on the screen as well. Hey, a few things as we get going this weekend, all right? A few things I just want to get on the table with you before we dive in. And because here's the deal, our sexuality and our sexual lives, it's a pretty vulnerable and often pretty broken area of our lives. It just is. And we're all walking into the room and into this conversation, most of us, with some kind of sexual history. We have a story there. And as we're going to see, God made all of us this way. I mean, he made all of us as sexual beings. It's his idea, it's his design. But like every other aspect of our lives, our sexuality has been impacted by the effects of sin. And some of us come into this conversation with some shame because of some of the sexual choices we've made. Some of us are walking in and we've got a really painful part of this story because we've suffered at the hands of an abuser. Some of us come to this part of our conversation with a little bit of confusion about who we are and how we're wired in this way. For so many of us, it's so private and it's so personal that it's really, really hard to talk about, like we've hidden it away. And so here's the deal. If you're here for the first time this weekend, or maybe you invited a friend and now you hear that we're going to talk about sex, this incredibly personal, vulnerable, often broken area of our lives, and you're nervous, because what's the dude with the microphone going to say about this stuff? Let me just hopefully put you at ease right from the get-go, because we're going to do just our absolute best this weekend to talk about sex openly and honestly, but gently and respectfully. Because let's just admit this, a lot of the times when someone gets behind a pulpit and it talks about sex, a lot of the times it feels more like a weapon intending to wound than it does a friend intending to help or a counselor intending to guide. It just does. And it's not to say that we won't talk about some difficult or challenging things this weekend. I'm 100% sure, that all of you aren't going to agree with everything I have to say from behind this pulpit. But even in those instances, here's what we want you to know, that no matter who you are sexually, no matter where you've been sexually, no matter what you've done sexually, and no matter what's been done to you sexually, if you hear anything else, hear this: God loves you. He does. And this weekend, just like every other weekend, you can look for God here. You can. Even if you disagree, even if you have questions, even if you have a past, even if you're broken. So if you're feeling a little uneasy inside, just take a deep breath, just relax. We don't want something from you this weekend. We're not going to try to push an agenda that we want you to conform to. Instead, we want something for you. We want something for you this weekend. In such a universal area of our lives, we believe that God, who created this whole thing, you and me and everything about us, God has something for you. And so that being said, okay, that's kind of our preamble here. Here's the big idea this weekend. Here's where we're going. If you're taking notes, here's the heading. Here's what we're going to be digging into the Bible this weekend around. It's this idea, okay? It's more than just sex. It's more than just sex. Okay, that's the big idea. Now, as we dive into that, let me just explain what I mean by telling you a story. One of the privileges I get as a pastor is the responsibility to officiate weddings. And we do a lot of weddings at Prairie Lake. We do a lot of weddings at Prairie Lakes. And I've done a lot of weddings over the last 13 years that I've worked here as a pastor. But part of our process for doing weddings at Prairie Lakes is premarital counseling. Premarital counseling involves taking some assessments to discover kind of who you are, how you're wired, who your spouse is, how your spouse is wired. It involves several sessions with a trained marriage mentor couple to start talking about some of these things. And it involves a couple of meetings with the officiating pastor, this guy, okay? And you might be thinking, that sounds like a whole thing. That sounds like a lot. And we would say, yeah, it is. It is a lot. Because even more important to us than just setting you up for a great wedding day, which we do, we want to set you up for a great marriage. And because we're a church where no matter who you are, where you've been, what you've done, what's been done to you, because we're like that, we get couples from all over the spectrum wanting to get married at Prairie Lakes. We get couples who are just getting married for the very first time. We get couples who are on their second. We get couples who are on their third. We get couples who are really strong in their faith. You know, they come to church all the time. They're really clear about who Jesus is. He's driving a lot of things in their life. We get people who come every once in a while, and they're still trying to figure things out, and maybe one's a little bit further along than the other. We get couples who don't go to our church at all, and they want to get married in a church, though, because mom and dad want them to get married in a church. And they looked at our building, and they're like, that seems like a cool place to get married, you know. And sometimes we get couples who are saving themselves for marriage. Sometimes we get couples who are living together and they're doing everything else together except for signing a marriage license. And we love that. We love that. We love that people from all over the spectrum are finding a place at Prairie Lakes and are trusting us with being a part of their wedding story, regardless of where they're coming from. But it does make for some very interesting conversations. It does. Especially when, over the course of my meeting with the couple, I ask them this question. I'll say, after small talk and talking about the process and everything else, I'll say, so, you guys having sex? Yeah. And usually what happens is that question is met with like a that, and then like that, you know? And then the couple kind of shifts uneasily in their seat a little bit, and they kind of look at each other, you know. And when that's their reaction, the answer is yeah, no, they are. They absolutely are. And how I cannot believe that a pastor just asked them just outright, you know. And then what happens is it's usually the woman who has the courage to say, yeah, we are, while the guy just kind of sits there. He just kind of sits there. That's what happens almost all the time, okay? But then they really don't know what to do with what comes next. Or really with what doesn't come next. Because I don't respond to them with some sort of, mini sermon of judgmental condemnation. I usually follow it up with another question. And here's the next question. So, what do you guys think about that? Well, what do you think about it? And I can't tell you how many times in that very moment what we discover together is this is literally the first time they've ever talked about it. Literally the first time. What do you think about sex? I don't know. What do you think about us having sex? Because they just never talked about it. And then I can't tell you how many times in that moment that after they start talking about it for the very first time, they discover that one, or sometimes even both of them, is kind of uncomfortable with how they're approaching it. They're uncomfortable with how they're approaching that part of their lives. One or sometimes both of them feels a little guilty about it. One or sometimes both of them wishes that they would do it a little bit differently. One or sometimes both of them knows that it's more than just sex. It's more than just sex. And they usually don't need a pastor kind of waving his finger at them saying, you are fornicating, you shouldn't fornicate. They don't really need that most of the time. I think we already know. That's my theory. I think we already know that it's more than just sex. We already know that it's more than just sex, but a lot of us don't know why. A lot of us don't know why, much less how to talk about it. Which is why I follow up after we have a super awkward conversation for a couple minutes. I'll follow it up with this question, that, what do you guys think God thinks about you guys having sex? What do you think God thinks about it? And that's where we have some really just amazing conversations. That's the conversation I want to have this weekend. Because God has a lot to say about sex. He does. And what we're going to do is we're not going to look at all of it. We don't have time. But we're going to look at 3 foundational things that God says about sex. And as we do that, I just want to be clear. We're not going to just hammer away at premarital sex this weekend. It kind of feels like we are. We're not. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about just what God thinks about sex. And it's going to have implications for sex in marriage, and it's going to have implications for sex outside. So 3 foundational things that God says about sex. If you're taking notes, here's number one. It's not just physical. It's not just physical. It is, but it's not just physical. It's spiritual. It's spiritual. Sex is physical, duh. But it's more than just a physical act. Because why? Because you and me are more than just physical beings. Sex is more than just physical because we are more than just physical. We're more than just our biology. We're more than just trillions of cells and water and neurons. We're physical beings, no doubt. And that's why some sexual issues really can be solved with some physical means. But we live in a time where it seems like the prevailing opinion is that's kind of all we are. That's mostly all we are. We're physical beings and not a lot more. That everything about us can be or eventually will be explained in biological terms. And so if that's the case, then really all sex is just a biological act, between 2 people. It's fueled by something in our biological makeup. And that's where the saying comes in. It's just sex. It's just a physical act between 2 people. It's not really anything more. But we believe that sex is more than just a physical act. Because you and I are more than just physical beings. And we're also spiritual beings. Well, that can't be proved biologically. It's not a biological statement. I'm not making a biological, it's a spiritual statement. We're spiritual beings. Now, what does that mean? Well, your spirit is the part of you that is united with your body, but it's distinct from it. Your spirit is your heart. It's not the heart that's beating in your chest. It's the aspect of your personhood that contains your will and your capacity to make decisions, and it explains why you make the decisions that you make. Your spirit includes your emotions and your character and your values. That's your spirit. It's the part of you that is kind of the essence of who you are. It's going to live. It's going to live beyond when you die. It's the part of you that Jesus wakes up and breathes his life into. When you step across that line of faith, that's your spirit. We're spiritual beings. We are. And so in light of that, get this. Everything we do has some type of spiritual impact on us because it's who we are. Even and including what we do in our sexual lives, it has a spiritual impact. Sex is physical, but it's not just physical. Because we're spiritual beings, sex is also spiritual. There's a spiritual dimension to it. And with that in mind, maybe we can now see maybe a little bit better or more clearly what God says about sex here and why. What we're going to go to next is a passage from Genesis 2:24, okay? And we're actually going to see a lot of other biblical authors quote this passage. It's a foundational passage when it comes to understanding this thing called sex. This is Genesis 2:24 talking about the first man and the first woman that God created and their sexual relationship, okay? So read along with me. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. So God describes sex as becoming one flesh. Now, you might look at that verse and go, no, he does not describe it that way. I don't see the word sex anywhere in that verse, actually. It seems to be talking about a man and a woman becoming husband and wife. And that's what it's talking about. Well, okay, let me show you another passage really quick. This one's from 1 Corinthians 6:16. We just went through 1 Corinthians last fall as a church, by the way, so some of you are going to remember this. Paul, there's a guy that's planted a bunch of churches, and he planted some churches in the city of Corinth, and he's writing some letters to them because he's having to address some issues. In fact, he's having to address a lot of issues, and a lot of the issues he's addressing in Corinth are sexual issues. So this one's from 1 Corinthians 6:16. Here's what he says. He says, do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute, because that's what was going on in the church, is one with her in body? For it is said the two will become one flesh. So here we're obviously talking about sex, right? That's what's going on here. And Paul's going to go on to say, hey, don't do that. By quoting this passage in Genesis that we just read, don't solicit a prostitute. Why? Because, like God says in Genesis, when you're having sex with someone, you're becoming one with them. In the physical act of intercourse, you're becoming one, two bodies becoming one, but also spiritually, because that's how God designed it. The two becoming one in really every way. Don't have sex with someone like a prostitute, or other passages of scripture we'll talk. Don't have sex with someone else's spouse. Don't have sex outside of a marriage, Don't have sex with someone who you aren't intending to become one with in every way. It's not how God designed it. See, he designed it so that you will be one, physically and spiritually, which is why those of us who, unmarried men and unmarried women, or cohabitating men and women, or boyfriends and girlfriends, or dating app users, it's why when you become one with someone in the act of sexual intercourse, but you're not intending to become one with them in every other way, that's why it gets weird sometimes. That's why it gets awkward. That's why one person usually has some expectations that the other person doesn't. It's why when you break up, it's even more painful, because you're tearing apart something that God has designed to bond you together. That's why. Because try as you might just to keep it a physical thing, it's not just a physical thing, because we're not just physical things. We're not. And by the way, the same thing is true for those of us who are married. Right? It's a little different, but it's kind of the same principle. Some of us, as married couples, and some of us we're currently there, or maybe we remember what this is like. We'll go long stretches of time as husband and wife, but no sex. Why? Well, it's usually a sign of something that's unhealthy, because we know sex is more than just a physical act. It's spiritual. It's connected to who we are in relationship as husband and wife, heart to heart, person to person, spirit to spirit. And when there's brokenness there in that kind of relationship, spirit to spirit, person to person, heart to heart, when there's brokenness, then often the first thing that goes is what? Is sex. We stopped having sex. No spiritual union, no physical union. Sex is physical, there's no doubt about it. But it's more than that. It's spiritual, because we're spiritual. That's the first thing that God wants us to really know about what sex is. That's what he thinks about it, okay, number one. Number two is this. Sex isn't just enjoyable. It's not just enjoyable. It's powerful. It's not just enjoyable, it's powerful. And this kind of follows from the first. Because sex isn't just physical, it's also spiritual, because it's intended to unify two people, bonding them together. It's really, really powerful. It really is. And don't get me wrong, it's also really, really enjoyable. It is. Good sex is great, and I'm not at all trying to be crass about that, sincerely. But as enjoyable as it is, it's even more powerful. It's even more powerful than it is enjoyable. Which is why God's design for sex is between a man and a woman in marriage. Throughout Scripture, God's design for sex is to happen between a man and a woman in marriage. Now, just hang on with me just for a second, okay? Because as I say that, here's what I know. I know there are plenty of you, listen to me right now, that could not disagree more. You just don't agree. You do not see it that way at all. And I know there are a lot of you who you feel genuinely just sick and tired of people like me, religious types who seem to want to legislate what consenting men and women do in the bedroom. And you're sick of it, You're tired of being judged. You're tired of being condemned. You thought you were at a church that wasn't like that. I know. I seriously, I do. And I get it. And thanks for just hanging with me here for just a second, because I'm not asking you, if that's you, I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not. I'm not up here condemning you for thinking differently than me. Here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to tell you not only what God says about this, but I want to explain to you why. Why is it like this? Sex is powerful. It is. It's powerful because it bonds two people together in some just incredible ways. And it's powerful because much of the time, it could result in like another little person running around. Right? Another person that you might be responsible for. So that's why God says it's to be experienced in marriage and marriage only, because marriage is the only thing strong enough to keep you from being harmed by the power of sex. Marriage is the only thing that's strong enough to keep you from being harmed by the power of sex. And just so we're clear, when I say marriage, I'm not just talking about two signatures on a piece of paper and a couple of rings on fingers, right? Because you and I both know that there's a lot of men and women who have those, but don't really have a marriage. Like when I say marriage, I'm talking about marriage as God intended. And we talked a little bit, Pastor Chip talked a little bit about this last week. Let me just explain. So marriage as God intended is a covenant. It's a covenant, okay? And this is what Pastor Chip talked about last week. God's design for marriage is to be a covenant. Just to remind you, here's what a covenant is. A covenant is a relationship that's built on a promise. I'm going to be in relationship with you, but our relationship together is based on a promise I'm going to make to you. That's what a covenant is. That's what a marriage is. It's a relationship between two people that's based on a promise. And again, I wish I had time to go through all of the many and varied promises that a husband and a wife enter into together when they enter into the covenant of marriage. But we could summarize all these promises up under one heading. And the promise is this: I promise to be faithful to you. I promise to be faithful. I promise to be faithful to you. And faithful to you in every way, to you and to you alone. Faithful to you sexually, faithful to you financially, faithful to you spiritually, faithful to you lovingly, faithful to you emotionally, faithful. Here's how Jesus talks about it. This is from Mark 10, 6 through 9. Here's what Jesus says. He says, but at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Have you heard that before? So they're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, then, what God has joined together, let no one separate. If you heard that at a wedding ceremony, that's where it comes from. So Jesus quotes the same passage from Genesis 2, which Paul already quoted in 1 Corinthians. It's got to be kind of an important passage. Only now when Jesus talks about it, he says that not only is marriage a promise to be faithful to one another, united together to becoming one, but also it's a promise that's made before God. Think about that. Now listen, I know a lot of us in the room have been, or even maybe currently are, in a marriage that isn't like that. We lived through or are living through a marriage that isn't like that. So for some of us, it's really hard to imagine, but just, if you can, this is how God designed it. He designed it for two people to promise to be completely faithful to one another. and to be so willing and so committed to that promise to be faithful that they make it before God as their witness. And it's in that type of marriage relationship in which sex can not only be enjoyed, but in which sex is safe. Because that kind of marriage relationship harnesses the power of sex to strengthen the bond of the relationship. And maybe even to support the care of another little rugrat, right? That's how it works. And if the nature of your relationship is anything less than marriage, and not just any marriage, but that kind of marriage that God has designed, if it's anything less then sex will threaten the health of your relationship. Eventually it will. Okay, so we've seen that sex isn't just physical, it's spiritual. We've seen that sex isn't just enjoyable, it's powerful, which sets us up for the third and final thing that God thinks about sex. And that is this. Number 3 is, it's not just about you, it's about God. That's a weird thing to say, I know, but it's not just about you, it's about God. And if you want to find Ephesians 5 right now, go ahead and do that. Let me set us up as we find that. See, when you approach sex how God intended, because it's not just physical, it's spiritual. It's not just enjoyable, it's powerful. When you approach sex how God intended in the covenant of marriage, and not just any marriage, right, but the kind of marriage that God intended, when you approach it that way, then something incredible happens. Something incredible happens. So here's how God puts it in Ephesians 5. This is Paul writing another letter to the church in Ephesians, but it's going to sound familiar. Ephesians 5, we're going to be looking at just verses 31 through 33. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Weird. This is a profound mystery, but in this passage, I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. See, when we approach sex how God intended, what it's going to do is create a life together that looks very much like what life with Jesus is like. A life of faithfulness, a life of love, a life of care. It'll look very much like what it's like to be in relationship with Jesus. When sex happens in the covenant of marriage where a husband loves his wife as he loves himself, and up further in the passage and down further, like as Christ loves the church, giving his life for her. And then when a wife loves her husband by respecting him in that way, and they both do it because this is who Jesus is, then your life becomes a picture of who Jesus is. Your life becomes not just about you. It's about who God is and what God is doing. It's not just about us. It's about God and what he's doing in us and through us, just like Jesus is doing with us as church. Okay? So those are the 3 things. As we wind things down, here's how I kind of want to leave you with a few things. First thing is this. I lost a good amount of sleep this week over this message. I'm not kidding. And there's a couple of reasons why, but the main one is that as I was looking ahead to this weekend, I had a couple of people in mind, like names, and they are, I'm just kidding, several names, and they fall into kind of one of 2 camps. And I was really worried that this was going to land weird with them, and I just don't want that. But camp number 1, there's a couple people that I know and love who are married, and this part of life is not good. It's pretty bad. It's pretty painful. It's not working. And there's a lot of reasons why. There's a lot of different stories here. There's stories of infidelity. There's stories of kind of hiddenness and shame. There's stories of like, I don't know why it's broken, and I'm trying to figure out why it is, and maybe I'm bringing in some weird expectations in, or maybe she, or, and it's just really hard. We just can't seem to talk about it. And you can hear a message like this, and you can hear about like what God says about it, and it can just feel like just a reminder that you're falling short. You're just not doing something right. And for those of you who are in that camp, I want you to know a couple things. That first and foremost, like Jesus is big enough, and he's strong enough, and he's powerful enough to walk with you through this. There's nothing you've done, nothing you're facing that's bigger than him. I want you to know there's hope for you. I want you to know that the shame that you feel cannot go deeper than the love of God extended through his son Jesus at the cross for you. And I know it's a discouraging place to be, and it's a weird place to be. And maybe you never thought you'd be there. But Jesus is big enough. And the second thing I want you to know is this. Kind of like Pastor Chip said last weekend, if you don't talk it out, you're going to act it out. If you don't talk it out, you're going to act it out. You can't talk about it. You need to talk about it. Every time we talk about it, it's okay, well, then please invite someone else in, a trusted friend. Invite your pastor, and I know that's super weird. Go see a counselor and stay at it, because Jesus will be faithful to you, and he loves you dearly, okay? That's the first camp I was kind of worried about. Here's the second. I have a lot of friends here who have found a place here. You love it here, like you belong here, and you belong because you belong, not just because we say you belong, like you actually belong. And you're living together, and you're having sex, and you're not married. Oh! We got a lot of people here at Prairie Lakes. A lot of you are like that. And I'm worried about how this message lands with you, because I don't want this experience that you've had at Prairie Lakes to feel like it's a bait and switch this weekend. Like, oh, it was okay until, like, you told me that I was screwing up in this part of my life. No. But here's what you need to know. At Prairie Lakes, we're 100% grace and we're 100% truth. We're not 50-50, we're not 75-25, we're not 90-10, it's 100 and 100. It's 100 and 100. We will never not be gracious with you, and we will never not tell you the truth. And so, hey, stop having sex with a smile on our face, with no condemnation, with please don't walk in here head down feeling like you're a second-class citizen, because the same thing is true for you as is true for me. Jesus died for that sin just like he died for all of mine. And no matter who you are, where you've been, what you've done, what's been done to you, you can look for God here. But here's what I want you to know, okay? If you find yourself like blood pressure a little high, face a little red, wondering what kind of conversations you're going to have in the car going home, I want you to know that you can trust Jesus with this. You can trust him with this. Some of us hold on to this so tightly, and it's not because we don't believe we should act differently. A lot of us hold on so tightly to this area because we don't know what it's going to be like if we let Jesus have it. We don't know what it's going to be like if we start living how Jesus tells us to live. I just want to tell you, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be great. Everything that you've experienced at Prairie Lakes to this point should tell you that. God is so good. He meets you right where you're at. He will journey with the awkward mess all the time. It's totally possible to live in an honoring way according to how God designed sex to be experienced prior to being married, even if you haven't to this point. You can trust him with it. You can trust him with it, okay? Okay, so I should be able to sleep a little bit better tonight. I just want you to know, okay, all of us, we walk into this conversation, all of us walk into this conversation a little bit broken. Some of us a lot broken, and it's okay. It's okay. Happy couples know it's more than just sex. It's more than just sex. But wherever we fall short, Jesus is there. Your campus pastor is going to come up and he's going to close down the service here in a little bit. But before he does, let's just all pray together, okay? Father in heaven, thanks for your son, Jesus. Thanks for the gift of sex. Thanks for just the wonderful nature of that, the picture, the symbol, the experience, the bond, the unity, everything about it. Thanks for giving us that gift. God, help us to be men and women who enjoy it like you designed it. And God, where we don't, challenge us and walk with us. Jesus, in your name, we pray. Amen.